Hello and welcome to ISEA webinar series, everyone. We are seeing a lot of you already here, waiting for a few more to join. We'll get started in a minute. Okay, fantastic. So great, welcome. Today, our speaker today is Dr. Anderson Cook. And before I introduce her, just wanted to have a quick couple of call outs. One is today's webinar for the audience members is listen only, but you please don't let that stop you from asking questions. You can type up your questions in the questions tab or even in the chat box. And I'll be happy to share them with Dr. Anderson Cook as the webinar progresses and towards the end of the talk as well. The second call out is our next webinar is on 27th January. It's a case study, a statistical engineering case study from PNG presented by Dr. Fang-Yi Lu. Hope you are signed up to receive our newsletter and communication from ISEA. We'll be sharing more details about that webinar in the coming weeks. Okay, so today's webinar is on asking good questions. And Dr. Anderson Cook has been a leading researcher in applied statistics and statistical engineering field for many years now. She was a leading research scientist at Los Alamos National Lab for about 17 years. She's a fellow of both ASA and ASQ and has authored numerous journal articles and case studies that use statistical methods to solve real-world problems. She has been recognized with George Box Medal Award, George Hahn Achievement Award, Schwartz Medal, William G. Hunter Award. So without further ado, I pass on the floor to Dr. Anderson Cook to share tips about how to ask good questions.
Great, Shilpa, and I'll just confirm that you are recording this. I didn't hear an announcement about that, but I just wanted to confirm.
This is being recorded, yes. Excellent,
thank you. Well, thank you for the nice introduction, and I'm delighted to be part of the ISEA webinar series. And I feel like statistical methods are developed to be used and to solve problems and to help make decisions. And so statistical engineering is really a key component of that. And not only does it help us solve problems, but it can really help elevate us as a profession as well, in that it can help us to reach our full potential and also increase the impact that we have on projects. And so today I'm going to be talking about questions in the paradigm of how we can use them to improve our collaborations and then also enhance relationships on these interdisciplinary teams that we often find ourselves involved in. So this is based on a white paper that I wrote for JUMP in 2023, the why and how of asking good questions. And so I'll sort of be basing a lot of what I'm talking about on some of the material that's in there, and that's freely available to download. So a little bit about what I'm hoping to achieve with the talk. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is quite intuitive and sort of gained through years of experience of just what works and what doesn't. And so I think for the early career statisticians, maybe it's just elevating questions and thinking about how you ask questions to a level where it's on your radar and you can think about its potential and how it might change those interactions that you have throughout the course of your working day. For the more senior people, I'm hoping that there'll be some comments and questions that they can add their insights to things that we're talking about today a little later on. But maybe there's a tidbit mixed in here that will help you just reveal something that you hadn't anticipated before. But good questions, I feel, are a real game changer in terms of what we can accomplish in our collaborations and in team building. So I'll talk about things just with a story to start, to sort of frame the kinds of things that we'll be talking about today. So this goes back to my undergraduate days at the University of Waterloo as a statistics major. And there was a moment where the professor was passionate and excited, and he was just zooming ahead through the material. And he's raising the chalk brush. So this is, I'm dating myself a little bit, back in the days of blackboards and us taking notes with paper and pen. And he's about to erase what we need to be writing down. And so I would shoot my hand in the air and I would ask a question about some practical aspect of what we'd been talking about, or trying to get some clarification. And it was a question I was interested in, but the primary motivation was really just to change the tempo of the lecture, to slow things down so that we could get reconnected to the professor who was zooming ahead. And so as our cohort traveled together over the years, I would often feel a kick on the back of my chair and someone whisper, ask a question, because we were all feeling that overwhelmed sense of just not keeping up. Or a little whisper from the back of the class, get that girl in the second row to ask a question. And it was all about tempo, us being able to get regrounded and connected and sort of feel like we are keeping up. And so if you think about a collaboration, sitting in a meeting, a lot of times statisticians have to learn a new discipline, sort of the fundamentals of it. There's moments where we feel overwhelmed. And I think asking a question is a good way to sort of help reframe the discussion and also just give everyone a chance to catch their breath. So those are the kinds of things that I'll be talking about today, just in terms of using questions, not just for the exchange of information, but more broadly as a way of just enhancing our meetings and also improving those relationships. So first, let me frame things a little bit with what the roles are typically on interdisciplinary teams. I think many times we're not the person who brings the problem to the group, but we're really viewed as part of the solution. And so I think that casts us in a different role than as owner of the problem. And I think if we asked people on the team, maybe that haven't been involved with a statistician before, we're often associated with data collection and analysis tools. So, we're the tools people, we're bringing the way to get the data and figure out what the data say. But I think our view should be much broader than that, that we should think of ourselves as also keepers of a structured approach for thinking about problem solving and decision making, where data is at the center of both of those areas. And I think that broadens our contribution to the group, but also it can really enhance the problem solving of the group if we introduce a structured approach. And of course, these structured approaches are central to what statistical engineering is all about. One more category of things that we bring that I think is quite valuable is that we're often newer to the problem space than many of the experts that form the rest of the team. And so we can bring new perspectives and ways to look at the problem. A lot of times, if you put experts together, they'll jump in and start what we might consider in the middle of the process, just taking for granted some of the assumptions about what's necessary or desirable to do. And so as a newcomer, we can ask those naive questions and say, you seem to be starting here, help me understand why that's a natural thing to do. And so challenging those established ways of doing things can help mitigate some of the blind spots that the experts might have, and also just give some thought to, are we in fact making the right assumptions, and are we considering the breadth of possibilities that we might have? And then through our experience and our expertise, we may also have different potential solutions that we can introduce for consideration for the group. So being the new kid on the block and getting up to speed does have some advantages. And I think it's important that we take advantage of that aspect of our role, because it can really help the group make sure that we're careful in the early stages to consider all of the options that we have. That being said, that is also one of the challenges that we have. Many times we are just viewed as the person who has the tools. You know, tell us what data to collect, we'll figure it out, and then we'll throw some data over to you to analyze. If we want to be a full member of the team, then I think we do need this broader perspective and make it clear through our questions that we really want to be talking about all aspects of the solution and be included with that. And then questions obviously are also a vehicle for getting up to speed in a new area. We need to be strategic about how we ask those questions to get information without disrupting the flow of the group too much. So in 2019, Lulu at the University of South Florida and Pete Parker of NASA and I wrote a paper on effective interdisciplinary collaboration. And I think that sort of, to me, outlined 7 fundamentals that are key to a good collaboration. And so I think that asking good questions can really help with all aspects of these fundamentals. So the first 3 are really about the relationship part of the collaboration. For the team to perform at its best, there needs to be mutual respect between all of the team members. There has to be a high level of trust that people can speak freely and know that people will interpret their contributions in a charitable way, and that they also trust their colleagues will follow through. And we all want to be pointed in the same direction with shared common goals about making sure that we're focused on the solution. And nobody wants to be on a team where someone is pushing their own agenda that's different from the goals of the overall team. The next 4 aspects are more about getting the job done. So we want to be on teams that have a high commitment to the success of the project, that communicate well about all aspects of developing and implementing the solution. This formal process, we talked about that before. We want to follow a structured way of tackling problems and making decisions that actually is documented and we're able to convey that we did our due diligence. And then lastly, we want to execute and be able to implement the solution and have it be successful. So there's a role for questions in each of those fundamentals. And so the things to think about as we're imagining the questions that we want to ask will be what is needed and when. So timing, I think, is an important aspect of asking questions. And then once we've decided what our purpose is, how do we ask that question well? So how can it be effective so that the question advances the team and doesn't throw up unnecessary roadblocks? So that's sort of where we're headed today. And the plan for the talk is broken into 2 big pieces. So one, the objectives. So what are we trying to accomplish with asking questions? And then the second part is about the mechanics or the how. So some tips and strategies that we might use to be able to organize and think about our questions to make them maximally effective. And then a couple of conclusions. So my plan is to have a short break at the halfway point after we finish talking about the why. I know there's a lot of collective wisdom in the audience today, and so if you have any comments or thoughts or questions about the why portion, we'll have a few minutes to talk about that before we transition to the how portion, which is more sort of how to implement our question asking in an effective way. Okay, so diving into the objectives, I think the traditional focus of questions is the exchange of information. Certainly that's a typical form that we have. And then if we're in a more teaching or learning realm, evaluation and assessment. And there's a whole literature on how we can ask questions for these 2 categories. And I think they also feel quite familiar to us. The next cluster I think of as helping to guide the conversation. So how can we improve when we're sitting in a meeting with our collaborative team or in a consulting environment? how can we in fact guide the question with a strategic question at the right moment. And then the next category is about enhancing the relationships on the team, because we know that respect and trust are key elements for a high-performing team. So that's sort of the bundles that we'll talk about for the why. Okay, so in terms of guiding the conversation, I think there's some approaches that we can use that tackle how we can best solicit feedback. We can make sure that the information has been sent and received in an appropriate way. And then a lot of times we can use our questions to challenge assumptions. So let me talk about that in terms of a simple example. So imagine in the first meeting, we've decided that we need to collect some data in the form of a designed experiment. And so now we're at the second meeting where I've gone off and thought through what I learned in the first meeting and come up with a potential solution for the data collection. So I've made this very simple just for the visuals. So this is a 2-factor experiment. We've maybe decided that the budget is 10 runs. And so if I present this as a solution, then we have sort of a very binary discussion. Is it good enough or not good enough? And there's a bit of pressure in both directions. So if I'm presenting this as a solution, I'm hoping it's the right solution. And my colleagues are all thinking, okay, she thinks this is the one. So unless there's a strong disagreement, probably they're going to do their best to think of ways that it could be good enough. But now let's turn that on its head a little bit and suppose that instead I present 3 alternatives. So it gives me the opportunity as I present them to sort of talk about their pros and cons. They're all using the same budget of 10 observations. And so now we can have a discussion about which of those feels like the best fit for what we're trying to do. Perhaps in the first meeting, people said, well, we're only interested in main effects and interactions. Well, the second choice, in the right-hand side of the top row, gives us an opportunity to think, well, maybe we should be thinking about curvature as well, right? And so this pros and cons gives people a chance to rethink what they asserted were their assumptions from before, as well as see the consequences of making those assumptions. And then the space filling design that I've put in as an alternative, now we can sort of broaden the conversation even more. So when I present a solution, I try very hard to have more than one option. And so it switches from is it good enough to not good enough to which of these feel better. It gives a chance for discussion. It gives a chance for people to change their minds about what they thought was important before when they see how that translates into a solution. And it also is a way for me to make sure that I heard correctly the first time what the mandate was that we were planning. So I think a strategy of encouraging discussion, presenting alternatives is a much healthier way to proceed with guiding the conversation and making sure that we've got some of these options on the table in a way that's not threatening, right? If they choose a different option than my first solution, that can be a comfortable experience for everyone. And I think that's what we want if our eyes are focused on the prize of getting the best possible solution for our project. All right, changing the tempo or direction. I think my example as from when I was an undergraduate is a key example for that. But I think many times we just reach this mental saturation point where in fact our brains are full and we just need something to change the tempo. And so that feeling of overwhelmed, particularly now as a more senior person, I have an eye to the more junior people and looking to see whether they're looking like they've reached that saturation point. And just a question to redirect things a little bit, to take an expert and get them to stop talking for a bit and let someone else talk about a different aspect of the problem. a question can cause those little nudges to talk about a different aspect of the problem that allows everyone to sort of catch up and get regrounded again. All right, in terms of enhancing the relationship, I feel that we often underestimate the value of respect and trust on our teams. And so it's really important to make an intentional effort to build those aspects on our team for the team to be high performing. So imagine at the end of this talk, we get to the conclusion, there's no questions. I'm going to feel like, okay, what did, how did this turn out this way? Was it too obvious? Did I not explain things well? I have all this sort of uncertainty about how things went. But with a few questions, then in fact, you feel like the message was received, people were engaged. And I think in a collaborative environment, we can do the same thing with questions. So somebody presents an idea, and asking questions to quantify or understand aspects of it, that makes them feel heard. And also it's just a way to sort of broaden the message and sort of amplify it a little bit by building on things that we have. Another thing that we can accomplish with questions is establishing rapport and inclusiveness. So many times, some of the more introverted people on the team may find it quite difficult to jump in and ask, make their contributions or ask questions. And so intentionally bringing someone into the conversation that maybe we haven't heard from, that's an easy way with a simple question. Bob, you're an expert on this. Do you have any thoughts on this aspect of the problem? That can be a way that just makes it a little easier for a reluctant team member to make their contributions and feel like they've been involved. Something that happens to junior members of the team, and also sadly women, is a lot of times they'll make a contribution and then immediately someone else will jump in and add their own contribution sort of on top of it that may be completely different than what was heard, what was contributed by the junior person. And so I think a question can sort of help rescue that situation. And so after the discussion on the change topic, going back to the person whose comment was not received and discussed in the way that they were probably hoping, that can sort of bring the conversation back to a point that was previously missed or not discussed in full. The last one, providing balance in relationships, I think is very important. And I learned this through one of my PhD students very early on at Virginia Tech. He admitted that he felt reluctant to ask questions sometimes because he felt like it was just slowing things down and that he was a burden in terms of our discussions. And that made me realize that in that relationship, I was the expert and he was the one who was running to try to keep up. And so from that point on, I made a very intentional decision to find something that student or intern was an expert in, and then to reverse the roles sort of in our free time or outside of meetings. And so some summers I learned about baking or video games or cooking. And that gave those students a moment to be the expert and me to ask the naive questions. And that actually was very helpful in terms of the long-term health of the relationship, because they weren't always in sort of this struggling to keep up mode. And so I think we have opportunities to do that in our collaborations as well. If an expert is dominating, then I think asking a question that sort of shifts things and puts someone else in the expert role can help the balance of a meeting, and also just sort of acknowledging the expertise that we all bring in different areas is very nice for group dynamics. All right, so we're at the halfway point of the talk. And so I think it might be a good moment to just pause a little bit and see if there's any questions or comments that people have about the why portion I'm thinking that there's a lot of collective expertise among some of the more senior people in attendance. And so they may have some ideas of things that we can accomplish with questions that maybe I haven't touched on.
There are a few questions right now, and I can go ahead and ask them. There is one that says, that asks, how do you stimulate questions from introverts or others that are perhaps overwhelmed with the discussion?
So I think someone who's overwhelmed probably doesn't want a question sent in their direction, but I think just asking a question, maybe anticipating what they may be wondering about and asking it of the expert, that may be an opportunity to just have that pause and take the burden off someone who maybe is feeling like, okay, I know I don't understand it, but I don't know enough about what I don't understand to ask a question. And so as a more senior person, I think it's asking questions gets easier over time. I think it's just very nice to sort of take a shot at what you think might be the point of confusion and let people then, once the discussion is sort of circling around a little bit back to a topic that might have been confusing, then I think it may be more comfortable and easier for the person who's a bit overwhelmed to catch up and be able to articulate what it is that they weren't understanding.
Great. There's another question, and I think the question says, does it make sense to vote for an option? And I'm assuming that's related to the part where in the presentation where you present alternatives to have an open discussion.
Yes. So I think whenever we can get from a pass-fail situation to a broader discussion. So when we get to the how portion, I'll certainly talk about that a little bit more again. But I think it is much healthier if people are able to say, I prefer this option and here's why, as opposed to, okay, let's do a straw poll and see, is it option 1 or option 2 that we're going for? I think a lot of times those discussions reveal things that maybe someone hadn't thought about before, but if someone else comments on it, then it's like, oh shoot, we really need to think about this. And so I do feel like we want, so there's a moment for expediency. We can't always just sort of chase around possibilities, but in the early stages and in evaluating different options, I think we want to be as open and flexible about how we talk about things as possible, just so that nothing gets swept under the rug and later turns out to be important and we didn't consider it.
There's another question from Catherine Becky, which says, I completely agree about the importance of respect and trust to facilitate an open and curious team environment. Do you have an example of a time when trust needed to be repaired amongst team members and how to tackle that challenge?
Right. So certainly that does happen. And yeah, and so I think maybe it's a little bit outside of the realm of sort of asking questions for it, but I think it's one of the strategies I think is to try very much to get to the root cause of what caused that breach of trust. So was it someone didn't follow through on what they were supposed to do? Was information talked about outside of the team? And then once the, what caused the breach in trust to come, probably just having a frank discussion about sort of team rules or sort of team etiquette of what's needed, and trying to say, this has happened, but I think going forward, we need to make sure that this does not happen again. And so it's not an instant repair, but it's a promise that in the future, the team will try to avoid that same breach of trust again. It's probably too big a topic to fully tackle, but I think tackling it head on is important. And then also making sure that the future will look different than the path of what we had as a problem before.
One more question from Susan Thornton. She asked, do you have any advice on how to respond to collaborators who may prefer a single option or definite answer as opposed to several options? For instance, collaborators may lose confidence in the statistician's ability or expertise if multiple options are presented.
Okay, so I think having multiple options does not mean that you don't have a preference. I think that's, so if there's some discussion and you outline pros and cons and you sense that there's some discomfort, I think it's entirely suitable for the statistician to say, based on what I've heard and based on our preliminary discussions, this design or this solution sounds like it's the best match for the team, but I think it's helpful that we had this discussion about the other alternatives just to confirm that in fact we are all on the same page and that we feel that this is the best solution. So multiple options doesn't mean that there in fact is, you're ambivalent to which of them is chosen, but I do feel like the preliminary discussion and then wrapping up the discussion with an assertion of, based on what I've heard, this is the right choice. How does the team feel about that? That's a way to sort of present yourself in the role of expertise, of having expertise, but not being heavy-handed and sort of stifling the discussion. So I think that that would be my approach to tackling that. Don't feel like you can't have an opinion, but I think reserve it until there's been some discussion and then proceed to sort of draw the conclusion or draw the conversation to a wrapping up point with, and now we should do this. So
there are a couple more questions, but they relate to the how portion, so I'm going to keep that for the end.
Excellent.
There is a comment that I want that William Ross has shared, and I wanted to just share it here as well with everyone. He says, there are two comments actually. He says, I think it is important to determine whom to ask the question of, when to ask them, and how to phrase the question. And he also says, I always say, if you don't like the answer, change the question.
That one feels a bit dangerous to me. So, all right, so let's continue on. I'm peeking at the time and we're on track, so I think that part is good. So now we're switching to the how portion of things. And again, we've broken it into a couple of different categories. So the first one is, and I think this actually relates to William's comment, before the meeting, I think there's things that we can do to sort of make the meeting go well and to make sure that we're prepared to ask our questions in the most effective way possible. And then during the meeting, there are things that we can do to sort of set up our question and to pose it strategically so that it's effective. And then the last one is all about tone. So if you ask a question aggressively, then I think you'll get defensiveness or people digging in. And I think that accomplishes very little. And so if we can ask our questions in a way that nurtures a sort of teaching kind of a strategy from the person answering it, then that's quite disarming, and they're more likely to just be open to talking about why they feel a particular way in a way that's more beneficial to achieving our overall goal. Okay, so in terms of preparation for the meeting, I think it's really important to do your homework. And so one aspect of that, and this was something that was conveyed to me very early on by a mentor, was always know what you want to get out of a meeting before going in. So walking into a meeting and having no plan, I think probably will turn out just the way you think it will. In other words, you may not accomplish anything. But if you go in with intention, and here there's sort of two parts of the intention. So one, what does the team need to get out of the meeting? So perhaps early on in a meeting, early on in a project, the meeting focus might be, okay, we need to understand some basic background and we need to make some decisions about what success looks like. So that's a team level goal of what we're hoping that the meeting can accomplish. But then there's also a sort of personal level for what to get out of the meeting. Okay, so we talked about this and I really don't get how that's related at all. So I need to get some answers for me to make sure that I see this connection, because it's clear that it's important. So go in knowing what you think a successful meeting will look like, and that will shape how you tackle the rest of things. The doing your homework also involves sort of making sure that you're as prepared as possible. So understanding and remembering what happened in the previous meeting. If there's materials to look at, actually look at them, and asking a question like, I still don't get whatever topic, that doesn't nurture someone wanting to help you. But if you can phrase the question as, I was reading the material you provided on this topic, and I think this is really important. Help me understand how this connects to how we're going to be using that item for our project, right? So people want to help you then, and want to help you make those connections if they feel like you've done your due diligence, and also your eye is on the prize. You're looking at how, in fact, the project will succeed with that particular piece of information. And then I think not all questions are suitable to be asked during the meeting. So I think that this is fundamental to sort of respecting the team's time and how valuable meeting together is. So I think there's often questions that we have that are best asked one-on-one with the suitable person, or sent through email. And so as you're thinking about your questions or what you'd like to get out of the meeting, try to make them something that's mutually beneficial, not just strictly for your benefit, but something that's going to benefit the team and it's accomplishing its goal. And then I like to say that I plan to be in charge of every meeting that I go to. So I think about what would be the ideal flow of what helps us get to achieve that meeting. And then obviously I'm not in charge of most meetings that I'm going to. And so it really just helps if there's a pause in the conversation, or a moment to nudge things in a direction that's more helpful. You sort of have anticipated what you're trying to do. But obviously, you're not in charge of most meetings. And so then you need to be very flexible and adapt as needed during the meeting. But I think knowing what you want to get out of the meeting and having a plan of how it might go that seems like it helps achieve that goal can give you the sort of momentum to jump in at the right moment and nudge things in a helpful direction to accomplish that goal. Okay, during the meeting, I think how you ask the question, one of the key ingredients to me is to have a bit of preamble that gives feedback on your level of understanding. So, you have a question and you say, I'm starting to get the hang of this, but I'm still a little weak in this area. That gives calibration for the person who's going to answer the question to pitch it at the right level, so that they're meeting you at a good starting point. But I think also confessing that lack of understanding or mastery of a particular topic definitely makes it easier for someone who has a question about the statistical part, for instance, to be able to say, okay, I still need more explanation on such and such. So building that environment where being vulnerable is easy and straightforward, I think, is a key ingredient to having the question answered in a way that you'll actually be able to understand what comes back, but also creating a climate of people being straightforward about where they're at currently in their understanding of different aspects of the problem. Early in my career, I used to feel like repetition was sort of a waste of time. And so I think repetition can actually be very helpful. So between one meeting and the next, people may have had additional thoughts on things. They may have changed their opinion. They may have some new insight. And so some repetition of things that have been discussed before, I think, can be very helpful in terms of making sure nothing gets forgotten or missed in the development of the solution, but it also for for people that are still not fully up to speed, gives them another opportunity to hear the same material, perhaps said a different way, to just have another chance to absorb things. The other piece that I think is very important during the meeting is balance. When I used to do mock consulting sessions with students in a consulting course, the pattern of things was, okay, I've got to build my background. I'm just going to keep asking questions. And so the expert would be peppered with questions in all sorts of random directions, and just sort of feeling like, okay, I'm building my background, I'm asking a million questions. I really think that if we're trying to establish our value on the team, we need something that balances those questions. There probably will be quite a few at the beginning, but then we need to interject some part of, yes, we're part of the solution. So on some part of the problem where you've got the hang of things, it's like, oh, I've got some ideas about what good data collection might look like for this, or oh, there are statistical tools that will be helpful when we get to this part of the problem. So I think it's important to be seen as inquisitive and curious and building your background, but also balance that with making sure that we keep moving towards the solution and that you have contributions to make to that solution. So that needs to be sort of dovetailed in, and not just a series of questions one after another. The other kind of balance is sort of balancing that role of expertise and learner. And so there's probably going to be moments where we're all the expert and sprinting ahead of the rest of the team. And then there's other moments where we're trying to keep up. And so I think questions can help reshape that in terms of shifting one person dominating as the expert and then transitioning to someone else making a contribution or talking about their expertise. So maybe the technical expert has been talking for a long time, just asking, so Sue, how would this translate into an implementation? So just sort of shift the expertise to someone else, change the topic a little bit. And that balance, I think, is very healthy for the team to just change the dynamics enough that everyone's strength gets recognized and also all aspects of the problem are being considered. And finally, the tone, I think we can get people to just absolutely shut down if we ask our questions in an aggressive way. And so I think it's important that when we're challenging assumptions or trying to re-steer the team to get them to think about the problem from first principles, that we do that in a non-aggressive way and sort of trying to nurture that teaching mode or that many of us have. So help me understand how this piece fits in with what we've defined a success to look like. That sort of reshaping, or this assumption seems critical. Are there other alternatives, or how is that the natural starting point for us? Those kinds of questions get people wanting to give you an explanation and not defend their position. I guess the other thing that's going to happen on teams is that there's disagreements. And I would say that the vast majority of disagreements probably come down to two underlying sources. So one is there's disagreements about the underlying science. So different people have different interpretations of what the science or the tools that we have can do for them. And so as in our role as statisticians, I think a way to help resolve or at least diffuse some of those disagreements is to talk about, what data do we currently have? What data could we collect? What other information is available, maybe from previous projects, that could help us resolve and sort out, what the science can actually do for us. Making it data-centric makes it less personal, and it also is the right path for finding the solution. The other category of disagreements is about priorities. And I think we can probably group most of people's priorities into 3 large categories. So one is focusing on performance. So what does our solution do? How well will it perform? The second category is cost. So, what will it cost in terms of dollars and manpower and resources? And if you put those two together, maybe they turn into something of a discussion about value. And then the third category is risk. And that again is a broad category. Will we be able to execute? Will it be the right thing for our customer? Um, you know, how could this go wrong? Where might we have some unknowns that we haven't anticipated? And I think what I've learned over the years is that we value those different aspects quite differently. So one person might be, I don't care what it costs, I just want it to be the best solution possible. And someone else may be, well, I think we need good performance, but we can't break the bank on this. We need it to be something within budget, so we have budget for other problems. And if we can get people to talk about what their priorities are, then I think it's much easier to understand why people are advocating for particular solutions. And so, jokingly, I've been on a team where someone says, okay, everyone knows I'm all about performance, so I'm going to push for this. But with that preamble, you sort of understand their motivation for a solution. And then I think you can talk about how do we balance different people's prioritizations of these big categories. And then that turns into a much less threatening position than someone advocating this is the solution and you're not quite sure what their motivation is. All right, conclusions. I think questions, I feel, are a tremendous vehicle for changing the dynamics of meetings, enhancing relationships, creating bonds in the team that just allow you to accomplish great things. I feel for statisticians, there's some short-term benefits that we can get from them. As you step onto a new team, you're the new kid on the block, many times not knowing much about the discipline. But if you view your contribution as asking good questions to help facilitate good interactions on the team, building a collective knowledge that will be helpful for solving problems, then I think that's a role that we can embrace and immediately gives you some traction as you step onto these new teams. I think it's important as the new people in a discipline area, a lot of times we can help connect to sort of what's really important. And obviously questions can help us get up to speed more quickly. And we always want our solutions and our decisions to be data centric. And I think questions are a good vehicle to sort of keep nudging the discussions and the decisions to be based on data that we have. In terms of long-term for statisticians, I think they can really increase our impact. There is no greater compliment that I've received is that when someone said, we want you on our team because you always make sure that we get to the right solution, that we're sort of focused on the right things. And so that sort of impact, I think, is a very powerful way for us to be involved in teams. And secondly, I think when you're on teams that accomplish great things, it leads to a tremendous improvement in career satisfaction. Some of my best days are being on a team that has accomplished something that felt like it really made a difference. And that's just a wonderful way to spend your career. Asking good questions is a journey, and I think there's 2 aspects to focus on. So one is developing instincts for what's needed and when it's needed, and then the other piece is practicing how to best frame those questions. And I would say in my career, early on, I probably had the instincts for what was needed before I was able to sort of execute and actually get the question out there and throw it out to the group. So think of it as a journey. I think it's a career-long journey that we're all embarked on. And if you think of it as an opportunity to sort of increase your impact, then it's a very good investment. The focus today was on sort of collaboration. The white paper also has some discussion about mentoring. I think there's ways that we can ask questions that are complementary to helping to mentor some of the early career people we encounter. And so that is a topic there just wasn't time for today. Again, if you're interested in the white paper, it fills in some more details than we had time for today. If you just go to jump.com/asking-good-questions, it will allow you to download the paper for free. Again, a pointer to the effective interdisciplinary collaboration that Lou and Pete and I wrote. This is a discussion paper, so there's many other experts who weighed in on what good collaboration looks like. And I think it's just a really interesting read to help you think about all of the many aspects and what you can do to make things run smoothly on your teams. The last one is a little bit different. Once we've started thinking about asking questions, the flip side of that is anticipating questions that others might have. And so if we can get into a mindset of thinking about, where are people likely to ask questions, if we can anticipate that, then that gives us a vehicle for improving our presentations, improving how we communicate our research results, and those sorts of things. Because if it's a question many people are going to ask, I should probably just address it right away in the presentation and then save that question time for more thoughtful or more extending kinds of things. So with that, I'll stop and I'm happy to hear any comments and questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson-Kirk. There is a question that is directly related to the last point that you brought up, and this is by, I am not sure if I'll be able to pronounce your name correctly, so I'm just going to read out the question and share your name along later. The person mentions, thank you for the nice talk. You mentioned using a logical step-by-step approach when addressing questions. However, in meetings, I often encounter unexpected questions that I haven't fully thought through. Do you have any suggestions for how I can handle these immediate questions more effectively?
Right. So I guess that happens to everyone. I'll say that first, that there's like just a question you haven't thought through, particularly on a more technical nature. You know, in your mind, you're thinking, oh, there's a lot of different things I could say here. So my strategy has been to take my best shot, to go trust your instincts and say, my first thought is to do this, or to offer some explanation. But then at the end, after you've offered your explanation, be careful to say, this is a fairly complicated question. I'm going to go back to my office and think through things. I've got some other ideas. And so in the next meeting, I'll sort of come back to that question. So give them something, your best intuition at the time, but then be careful to qualify that with, this isn't a complete answer. Don't think it's written in stone, and I will get back to you. And then follow up with the person either one-on-one or in the next meeting. But I think just saying there's a lot, I don't have anything, is quite unsatisfying. So take a shot, but then temper it with, I may want to revise that once I've given it some more thought. And very rarely in meetings does someone need an answer and there'll be immediate action on that. And so that's why I think the opportunity to revise almost always is practical in terms of how to proceed.
Another question from Francis Watson says, how much statistics to talk to non-statisticians?
Well, so a lot depends on sort of what you know about the background. I guess if you're still feeling that out and are not quite sure of the background, I usually start with the intuitive explanation, sort of the big picture, broad, sweeping explanation. And then if they look unsatisfied, sort of keep digging a little deeper and filling in questions. If you're in a group setting, I think that high level, intuitive, talking about advantages and disadvantages of the method, that goes quite a long way. But at the point where you're presenting results, I think it's quite important to sort of revisit assumptions. So based on our previous discussions, I made the assumption that this was an appropriate way to interpret the data. So I think filling in the key aspects, maybe not the nuts and bolts of the method, but more what it takes for the method to be used successfully, so that people can do that matching up of, yeah, that sounds like our problem, or, oh, that doesn't sound like something we should be assuming. That part should be emphasized. And then also maybe giving some resources for someone to, I'm happy to walk you through more details on this as we go forward. But I guess I start simple, and then if they keep probing and if they ask questions, then you get some calibration of the level that they're taking in your explanation, and then you can respond to that. So that's if you're starting from a blank slate and maybe you're not sure of the background of the people you're interacting with.
There's a comment from William Ross, and he says, I think the tone is situation dependent. There are times when aggressive questioning is needed and others when that would be detrimental. What do you do to help you diagnose the situation to determine appropriate tones?
Right. So, and I think this is also a personality thing as well. So I find it very difficult to ask aggressive questions. So most often I resort to the gentler approach, and sadly there's lots of others who are willing to ask aggressive questions. So for me, the aggressive approach is rarely my instinct, and I think that that's the personality part of it. But I think I would say I replace aggressiveness with persistence. So if someone is not responding to sort of the gentler version, then I'll keep poking at that topic if I feel like it hasn't been dealt with appropriately. Yeah, I think reading the room, that's an art unto itself. But for me, my instinct is to make it a match for what you're comfortable doing, and go with that.
There's a question from my side as well. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how can we bring all this knowledge and wisdom to classroom and train the early career folks or junior data scientists, however you want to call them, to learn this art of asking questions in their work.
So a couple of simple thoughts. One is to just expose them to it. So I'm trying to think if at any point in my training, someone made me aware that asking questions was an important thing to focus on. I think I'm hard pressed to imagine that happened. The emphasis was on tools. And so I think that's step one, is to get it on people's radar that it's something we should be focused on, and that good things happen when we ask questions well. And then secondly, I think a lot of this, so having someone tag along and watching you ask questions, but before the meeting say, focus on the questions that I'm asking. Don't be absorbed in the technical details of things, but see someone asking questions while focusing on that, I think is helpful. And I certainly have done that in a consulting class, had an expert come and we do a mock consulting session, and the students are primed to be thinking about, how did this interaction go? I think that's the next phase. And then the last phase is, it looks pretty easy when someone else is doing it, but until you get experience and asking questions, the whole flow and sort of the balancing of things, that actually experience is the key. So I think that progression, we need to have those opportunities built in. And I know ISEA has been pushing sort of to get statistical engineering topics introduced into the curriculum. And I think as we start focusing on solving real problems, there are the opportunities for asking those questions and to make that something that we consider mastering, make that an important focus. So hopefully that's helpful.
There are a couple more questions, and let's take probably one more and then wrap up because we are at time right now.
Okay.
Sorry, there are more comments than questions. There is one question about the quality progress paper. Is it already printed or is it in print? The quality progress article that you have.
The anticipating question. So it has appeared. So it appeared in April of this year. And whoever's asking the question, if that you're not able to access it, just send me an email. Let me jump back here to the first page. Send me an email and I'm happy to send you a copy of the paper. So, and that's true for any of the papers. Go to jump.com for the asking questions one, but any of the other papers on things related to this, I'm happy to share them. Just drop me an email.
With that, thank you very much for your time, Dr. Anderson-Cook. It was truly a great talk, and thank you for sharing your expertise and experience with us. And thank you, audience members, for your questions and your time and attention. Our next webinar is on January 27th. Please be on the lookout for more information about that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Shilpa.
Well done.